And it was a combination of indulgences and the prior kind of corruption and greed charges that pushed these desires for change in uh, religion. But you also had people's minds that were changing culturally and spiritually. Culturally, a lot of things drifted down from the Renaissance. Remember humanism? Nice David down here. There was growing individualism and people thinking for themselves. Society is humanistic and secular. They're not trying to think of how they relate to the church. They don't want dependence on the church. And they don't want to have to follow the constraints that the church is putting on the way that they practice Christianity. They're thinking about themselves as an individual. How do I, as an individual, relate to God? Not going through the church as a middleman, but directly that one-way communication. And in cities, the growth of cities thanks to exploration, you have more educated and more people who are a lot more critical of the church. They have the education, for one, and more ideas that they're introduced to that allow them to think more about religion. Whereas in the rural parts of Europe, you're not going to be as likely to run with radical new ideas of the century. Also, with the development of absolute monarchs, they wanted to hold power over a country that if the church was around and the church was holding sway over citizens, that's less control that you have over being able to make decisions. So a lot of rulers were looking for ways to take back some of the power and wealth and the lands that the church was currently holding. And for spiritual reasons, there was a growing desire for religion among the European masses, this zeal or excitement. People wanted to explore religion. They wanted to get into it and learn about it for themselves. They wanted the Bible translated so that they could read it on themselves. People couldn't read Latin. It just took too long. It was a dead language and not very many people knew it or knew how to study it. But if it was translated, that would be more access for more people across more of the continent. He also wanted to return to what they called the simplicity of the early church, where church didn't have all of these services and these rules and these ceremonies that you had to go to. It was simply a relationship and worship that they wanted instead. And here you have two of the kind of beginning reformers in this time period. Up here is Erasmus, and he was actually a part of the Catholic Church. He had spent some time in the church and realized that, hey, there's some stuff here that I don't quite agree with. And he wrote a critique of the actions and the beliefs that he saw the Catholic Church using that he disagreed with. But because he was so even and calm, he didn't pick a side, and he wasn't ever persecuted for speaking against the church. And down here, John Wycliffe was a reformer from England. And he was also one of the first people to call for a translation of the Bible, and did in fact translate some of the Latin Bible to Middle English. However, after his death, he was declared a heretic by the church, and all of his works ordered to be burned. So some consider him to be one of the first kind of Protestant reformers or movements in this larger revolution. And the thing that really helped to make these little ideas of individual people widespread was the invention of the printing press. And in 1450, Johann Gutenberg in Germany created Europe's first movable type printing press. And 5 short years later, had published the Gutenberg Bible in Latin. After this point, paper becomes easier and cheaper to make, and books are therefore a lot easier to make and get a hold of. Before the printing press, books had to be painstakingly done by hand, letter by letter, page by page. And so it would take years, if not decades, and lots of money to create those books. But now they can spread all over the place. There's a saying that ideas spread like wildfire, and this is a sure example of that. Ideas spread a lot faster when you're able to write them down and publish them at a faster rate than by simple word of mouth. If one person has an idea and they tell it to another person, they might tell it to 2 more people, and it's a very slow transgression to get to more and more people. And it's really easy to stop that if ideas are from person to person, because all you have to do is point a finger at somebody and say, their idea is wrong and they're going against society. And then people, in some cases, will begin to avoid that person and ignore their ideas because there's that social stigma of, we can't believe what you're saying because you're wrong. But with books, one person can have an idea and create 20, 25, 30 books that get sent out, read, published, shared, and more people talking about them. And it's a lot harder to pinpoint the beginning of that and to stop that, which is how these ideas spread farther, even despite inquisitions going and trying to stop the ideas before they get started. And you have increased criticism of the church because of this, especially by the urban and the literate populations. These are the groups of people who will be reading books and will be discussing ideas. They're also the ones who are desiring more of a split from the church because they're directly in secular life. They're directly in living in the here and now, doing whatever I can to benefit myself. And so because of this large sequence of events, some people consider the printing press to be a revolution in its own right. It spreads ideas at a much quicker and faster rate than anything else. It also increases education. If you read, you can read other books and gain more ideas. What reading and books also do is allow you to question and think more. You can think about old and new ideas, compare them, contrast them, think about them in a way totally different than ever before. You have a new access to information. Before the printing press, the church was the only person who had access to the Bible. They could say, this is the truth because I read it right here, and you can't read Latin, also this is the only copy that we have. And that worked. But after the printing press, you could say, this is the truth, and somebody else can, pull up their own copy and say, oh, I don't think so, because I can see here that it actually says. And even in modern times, we have access to the internet and smartphones where we can immediately fact check someone if we feel like they're saying something wrong or incorrect. Access to information is an incredible way to change society and to change the ways that people think. So in light of those ideas, I have one final question to end off today, to think about as we wrap up today and transition into what we're talking about next week. What do you think will happen if the Catholic Church loses its monopoly on religious information? If the Catholic Church no longer is the only person with access to the Bible, what do you think will happen?